Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to this last session of the Morocco Capital Market Days. My name is Mariam Zairi and I will have the pleasure to moderate the session today. I am Senior Managing Director at SIF, a VC fund dedicated to startup and innovative company in Morocco and regulated as an OPCC fund in Morocco. I am also president of the commission in charge of startup and digital transformation within CGM, CGM being the private sector representative in Morocco. I would like to thank the audience, our guests, our speakers to be here to discuss with us, for joining us to discuss the trends and dynamics and opportunities of the Moroccan capital markets. Today, we are also honored to have among us high-level representative of the Moroccan government. I would like to thank you, Your Excellency, the Minister of Economy and Finance, Mrs. Nadia Ftah Alaoui, and Your Excellency, the Minister of Digital Transition and Administrative Reform, Mrs. Rita Mzour. Welcome. A special thanks, please, to our host today, the Moroccan Capital Market Authority and the Casablanca Stock Exchange for their support of this forum, where key stakeholders will have the opportunity to share their insights on the markets. We are delighted to have among us a unique lineup of speakers today that will share with us their insights. Please join me in welcoming Your Excellency, the Minister of Finance and Economy, Mrs. Nadia Ftah Alaoui.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to be with you today for the Moroccan Capital Market Days. And I'm taking this opportunity to congratulate and thank all the participants and guests and the Moroccan Capital Market Authority and the Casablanca Stock Exchange for organizing this event during the last day of Expo 2020 and bringing us together for these important topics that deals with great opportunities given by the capital markets in Morocco. The Kingdom of Morocco has been fully aware for years for the role and the importance of the capital market in financing corporates and companies, but also the global economy in Morocco, and has undertaken since the early 80s a set of structural reforms to lay the foundation of a regulated market before continuing with the second major reform undertaken since 2013 to modernize various aspects of the market and align it with the best international standards. Allow me to mention some of these major reforms: the introduction of new asset classes to meet the diverse needs of players, such as sukuk, rates, or a derivative market that is about to be set up. Also, the introduction of a new architecture of the Casablanca Stock Exchange through the creation of a new alternative market dedicated to the SMEs. The integration of the Casablanca Stock Exchange with the global markets has also been reinforced by the recognition of new listing opportunities, such as securities issued by foreign issuers, securities denominated in foreign currencies, and also cross-listing with fungibility of securities. In parallel to those technical reforms, other measures have led to major advances in this capital market, including measures concerning the role of the capital market regulator, which has been strengthened since 2016 as the Moroccan Capital Market Authority, and the scope of action has been expanded with more independence and with an approach focused on both market surveillance and also development of the market. The multiple reforms undertaken by the Kingdom have contributed to the development of the Moroccan capital market to international standard, making it the second largest market capitalization, around $65 billion, and the second largest mutual fund market in Africa, $60 billion almost, with net assets representing more than 50% of total bank deposits. That said, Morocco, as part of the new development model, places the capital market at the center of its economy as a catalyst for economic growth and in financing the recovery, with the ambition of making the kingdom a regional financial hub for international capital and African economies. Strong commitments are made by the government to complete the reform begun in the 90s to transform the stock market to a dynamic market capable of playing its full role in financing the economy. Make Morocco a major financial platform in Africa, able to attract foreign investors and issuers, and establish a legislative and regulatory environment conducive to the rapid development of the capital markets. Furthermore, the dynamic enhanced by the establishment of the Fund Mohammed VI for the investment that will invest through private equity funds mainly and in different sectors, the reform of the state-owned companies and the opening of their capital to the private investment that could be done either directly or through the stock market or both, and the reform of the tax system. To conclude, I would like to point out that the choice made by Morocco to make the capital market one of the 5 bets of the new development model, and thus to breathe new life into the Casablanca Stock Exchange, is the first step to make Morocco emerge as a financial hub in the region. The various advantages that Morocco offers by its geopolitical and economic situation, combined with the various means put in place by public and private actors for the development of the capital markets, offers a real opportunity to investors for their development both nationally and internationally, and particularly in the African continent. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for this keynote speech. I have the pleasure now to invite on the stage Mrs. Nessa Hayat, the CEO and chairperson of the Moroccan Capital Market Authority.
Your Excellency, Mrs. Nadia Fattah, Minister of Economy and Finance of the Kingdom of Morocco. Your Excellency, Mrs. Rita Mazour, Minister of Digital Transition and Administration Reform of the Kingdom of Morocco. Dr. Maryam Swedi, CEO of Securities and Commodities Authority, Mr. Kamal Mokhda, Chairman of the Casablanca Stock Exchange, and Mr. Tariq Senhaji, CEO of the Casablanca Stock Exchange, dear panelists, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure and honor to welcome you here today at the first edition of the Morocco Capital Market Day in Dubai, co-organized by the Casablanca Stock Exchange and the Moroccan Capital Market Authority. Expo 2020 Dubai is a unique platform to showcase the Moroccan capital market's opportunities to international investors and companies seeking financing and diversification. Our capital market is among the most developed markets in Africa, with 76 listed companies and a market capitalization, as Her Excellency mentioned, of $69 billion. Thanks to the impactful reforms engaged throughout the years, as mentioned by Her Excellency, the Minister of Economy and Finance, our market is the second largest in Africa. Among these reforms, as was previously mentioned, the transformation of the regulator to an independent authority with additional powers, broader missions, and an extensive scope of action. And also, we evolved our regulatory approach focusing equally on market oversight as well as market development. Speaking of market development, the vision of AMMC that is embedded in our 2021-2023 strategic plan is a capital market serving the financing of the economic recovery. Ladies and gentlemen, the Moroccan Capital Market Authority is committed to contributing to the economic recovery by enhancing the attractiveness of the capital market for enterprises and project holders. Our role will be more relevant in the current context as economic recovery requires the mobilization of substantial financing that goes beyond traditional means. Accordingly, we focus on facilitating market financing for companies and promoting regulation that is adapted for innovation while promoting sustainability in financial services and activities. In 2015, Morocco announced ambitious climate targets at COP21 ahead of hosting COP22 in Marrakesh the following year. The COP22 kickstarted the country's sustainable finance policy journey. Since then, AMMC has published guidelines on green, sustainability, and social bonds. At the authority, we have also issued recently gender bonds, corporate social responsibility, and ESG reporting guidelines. In addition, it has made annual ESG reporting mandatory for all issuers on the market and built on ESG index with the Casablanca Stock Exchange. All teamed bonds issued in Morocco so far have been oversubscribed, and we are confident that the development of responsible finance will contribute to a more sustainable and resilient economic recovery. We are continuously aiming at strengthening confidence in the market and enhancing its attractivity for savers, companies, and project holders. To this end, AMMC commits to consolidating its risk-based supervisory approach to ensure the continuous integrity and transparency of the market. In addition to these issues, overarching global themes have become paramount aspects to address when thinking strategically about market development. I'm thinking about fintech or technologies like blockchain, artificial intelligence, big data, which profoundly transform business models, and financial services will be no exception. Regulation is a crucial element to ensure the credibility, trustworthiness, and round development of fintech. The challenge for regulators such as AMMC is to find the right balance between enabling digital innovation and fulfilling their regulatory mandates pertaining to investor protection, market fairness, and financial stability. In Morocco, we are progressing well with the first generation of fintech, namely crowdfunding. The regulatory framework for this activity is about to be ready. I'm looking at Her Excellency, the Minister of Finance and Economy, and so we can plan to an effective launch in the coming months or weeks. Thank you, Your Excellency. In this regard, I would like to take the opportunity as well to thank Her Excellency, Mrs. Rita Mazzour, Minister of Digital Transformation and Administration Reform, for joining us today at this conference, demonstrated, if needed, the government's commitment to supporting the digitalization of financial services. Internationally, AMC is actively involved in standard-setting organization and regional cooperation initiatives. We take part in various policy committees. We sit on the boards of directors at IOSCO, the International Organization of Securities Commission, and take leadership in our region, mainly through the chairmanship of the Africa and Middle East Regional Committee, AMERC, of IOSCO. We have also adopted a progressive and phased approach to support financial integration at both continental and regional levels to facilitate cross-border investments and channel financing flows to the most relevant projects in the region. We at IMMC have focused our efforts on building a solid cooperation framework with fellow regulators in the region, covering more than 20 jurisdictions, which is a vital prerequisite for protecting local and international investors while authorizing cross-listing and cross-border distribution of financial products. Additionally, we have joined regional and continental initiatives such as working on market integration and harmonization, such as WASRA, which is the West Africa Securities Regulators Association, and ALEP, the African Exchanges Linkage project, together with the Casablanca Stock Exchange. And we will continue to work closely with capital markets regulators from the region to facilitate mutual understanding and the conduct of cross-border financial services and investment. In this regard, I would like to take the opportunity to thank my fellow regulator at the United Arab Emirates, namely Her Excellency Dr. Mariam Aswadi, Chief Executive Officer of the Securities and Commodities Authority, and the distinguished representatives we had with us today from Dubai Financial Services Authority at Dubai International Financial Center and the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Abu Dhabi Global Market for attending this edition of the Morocco Capital Markets Days in Dubai. To conclude, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to Her Excellency, the Minister of Economy and Finance, for accepting our invitation and for her continuous and strong support to the capital market environment. I'm looking forward to hearing from our panelists, whom I thank for being with us today. Thank you all, and let's have a great session.
Thank you, Madame la Présidente. To conclude this round of opening speech, I invite Mr. Kamel Moqdad, Chairman of the Casablanca Stock Exchange.
Excellency Mrs. Nadia Fattah Alaoui, Minister of Economy and Finance of the Kingdom of Morocco. Excellency Mrs. Rita Mzour, Minister in charge of Digital Transition and Administrative Reform. Madame Neza Hayat, Chairperson and CEO of Moroccan Capital Market Authority. Dr. Aswadi, CEO for UAE Securities and Commodities Commission. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. We just heard an outstanding presentation on our value and proposition from the two brilliant speakers before me. And it's not an easy task speaking after these estimated guests and ladies, of course. I will try to share some additional thoughts about how markets and its stock exchange can be useful in this very special context. A context of full different challenges and also of real opportunities for potent economic recovery. And within that remit, possibilities to involve more international investors and issuers. Ladies and gentlemen, conscious of the need of a new paradigm to accompany the rapidly changing economic landscape, Morocco has launched in May 2021, under the guidance of His Majesty King Mohammed VI, the new development model. Since then, our country has embarked on a new trajectory of a stronger, more inclusive, and more sustainable growth. This new model has placed Bourse of Casablanca as the heart of its financing architecture, which aims at accelerating post-COVID economic recovery and generating new areas of growth. The new development model has assigned to the capital market in general and to Bourse de Casablanca ambitious goals, including four-fold increase of the number of listed companies by 2035, bringing the market cap to 70% of GDP, and boosting the share of international investors in trading to 25%. Undoubtedly, Bourse de Casablanca, Moroccan Capital Market Authority, the authorities, and the operators are fully mobilized to achieve these goals and further increase the attractiveness of Moroccan stock market, both to national as well to international issuers and investors. In addition to mobilizing funds to finance both the private and the public sectors, boosting private investments is also one of the key elements of the new model. with the goal for reaching 2/3 of private investments versus only 1/3 currently. Bourse de Casablanca, the second, as we said before, largest exchange in Africa, will also have to play an important role as catalyst, contributing to the financing and the transformative objectives of the new Mohammed VI investment fund. Lastly, we are committed to positively impacting investments flow to sub-Saharan Africa within the framework of the South-South vision of the Kingdom of Morocco. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, the investments and growth opportunities are tangible, and we have made it a priority at Bourse de Casablanca to first boost our IPO market and to allow companies to benefit from the strong demand and favorable financing conditions. And as an illustration, the last two capital raising have clearly outperformed. If I mention the last IPO, it was oversubscribed 22 times, and the latest capital increase company have been oversubscribed for 7 times. The Casablanca Stock Exchange is also very open to international investors who can invest freely in our markets and who have no constraints on the repatriation of invested capital, of capital gains, and for dividend served by a listed company. Investing in companies listed on Bourse de Casablanca means also investing in companies that are uniquely positioned in Morocco and sub-Saharan countries, with a sustainable competitive advantage and a long history of profitability and strong future opportunities. Without further ado, I will leave the floor for a high-level panel of senior and extremely knowledgeable economic panelists who will provide you, I'm sure, with an insightful and accurate overview of our Moroccan capital market and hopefully entice you to consider closely opportunities it bestows. Thank you for your attention.
Many thanks for these thoughtful speeches and for sharing with us the long-term vision. And more importantly, it is not only an ambitious vision, but a common vision shared by all stakeholders, public and private stakeholders. Today, we have the chance to host this panel with leading industry experts who will share with us their views on key achievements in building a flexible and scalable infrastructure and make the case for Morocco as an attractive investment destination. We will address questions such as, why should you invest in Morocco now? What are the opportunities? How does the capital market contribute to the financing of the economy? What makes Morocco the optimum hub to operate from in order to access the rest of the continent? Without further ado, please join me in welcoming our panelists. Mrs. Elisar Farah Antonios. Please join us. Mrs. Elisar is a seasoned banker with an extensive experience in the financial industry. She is CEO of Citi UAE, and in 2020, she was appointed head of the Middle East and North Africa region, becoming the first woman to hold this position at Citi. Congratulations. She's ranked by Forbes Middle East among the top 100 most powerful and influential Arab businesswomen. Thank you for being with us. Mr. Ismail Douiri. Mr. Ismail Douiri is the general manager of Tijari Wafa Bank, a regional financial institution based in Casablanca. Tijari Wafa Bank is present in 25 countries with total assets of 65 billion USD and total equity of 6.3 USD billion. He is director to most subsidiaries of Tijari Wafa Bank in North, West, and Central Africa. Welcome to this panel. Mr. Khalid Nasser. Mr. Khalid Nasser is the Executive General Manager of Bank of Africa, BMCE Group, in charge of CIB and Morocco. He oversees retail banking activities in Morocco, corporate and investments bank, as well as international subsidiaries and debt recovery. Thank you for being there with us. Mr. Abdelmajid Iraqi Husseini. Is the chairman of TAQA Morocco and Jorf Alfsfar Management Board. He has spent most of his career in the energy and utilities sectors, and he will share with us his views on this segment in Morocco. TAQA Morocco was listed in the Casablanca Stock Exchange in 2013 and has a market capitalization of 2.6 billion USD. Thank you for being there. Mr. Naufel Ben Dafa. Mr. Naufel Ben Dafa is the founder of Reem Partners and CEO of Aradi Capital, a real estate manager with more than 500 million assets under management. Naufel has over 20 years of experience in development, asset management, and fundraising. Thank you for being with us today. I have forgotten to mention something very important. Mr. Naufel Ben Dafa is also a member of the board of the newly created Moroccan Association of Market Issuers. And finally, Mr. Younes Benjelloun. Mr. Younes Benjelloun is partner and CEO of CFG Bank, based in Casablanca. CFG Group is an independent investment bank providing the full spectrum of investment banking, corporate financing, capital market transaction, portfolio management, and venture capital. Welcome to all our panelists, and thank you for accepting our invitation. So our session will be organized in two parts. For the audience. The first part will be articulated to provide an overview of the current status, our infrastructure, and how this infrastructure is scalable to achieve all the ambition that we have expressed. And the second part will have a forward-looking perspective to project us into future opportunities with the objective by 2035 and clear KPIs that have been already expressed. So to start off this discussion, we welcome Mrs. Farah Antonios. We agree that I will call you Elisar.
Elisar, please.
Yes. We will be grateful if you can share with us how the Moroccan capital market is perceived by global investors at the moment. Then how did Citi's experience as a global bank active in Morocco contribute to deepening and diversifying the pool of capital available to finance domestic economy and investment? Thank you so much.
First of all, thank you, Mariam. It's a pleasure to be here. And I think it's a pleasure to be here also in person and to feel some normality of not needing to say, you're on mute. Please, you're on mute, we can't hear you. And I think this is not something you're going to hear from all of us here. It's also a pleasure to be here at Expo. And today is the last day of Expo, and I think many of us who tried to arrive today with the number of people, it was quite overwhelming to see how great Dubai Expo has done and for them to be hosting us here. So as you introduced me, I am actually based in Dubai, and I feel Citi is quite lucky and uniquely positioned when we talk about Morocco and opportunities of Morocco, and when we talk about that from Dubai, because Citi came to the UAE in 1964, and it also established our operation in Morocco in 1967. So we feel quite privileged and lucky to have an in-depth understanding of the region and as well as of the market. And I definitely want to thank the Moroccan Capital Markets Authority as well as the Casablanca Stock Exchange for inviting us, inviting me representing Citi, and also for all the efforts that have been deployed so far to align the Moroccan capital market to international standards and to making it, much more appealing to foreign investors. I think the nomination of Mrs. Hayat as Vice President to the Africa and Middle East Regional Committee of the International Organization and Securities Commission is a great testimony, I would say, to the credibility of Morocco and the Capital Markets Authority that they enjoy with the committee. Her Excellency spoke about the numerous steps and measures that have been taken to promote the local capital markets. And maybe I'd like to kind of cite a few of them where we feel that these have actually contributed to the right positioning of the Moroccan capital markets. So one of them is around the certification of capital markets function to reinforce investor protection. Your Excellency, you also mentioned around the new enforcement board as part of the Moroccan capital markets new general regulations. The Casablanca Stock Exchange new regulations providing, be it electronic traded funds or dual foreign currency listing, the derivatives, introduction of derivatives as well, flexibility around listing criteria to encourage more SMEs, as well as the new security lending and borrowing law, which is opening the door for foreign investors and foreign securities to be used as collateral. So all these, I would say, are very good measures, important enablers to support Morocco's ambition to gain more attractiveness. Now, on the other hand, and maybe this is one of the kind of aspects that maybe we can shed some light on, is we believe that Morocco would definitely gain with more attractiveness for foreign investors, kind of for us to put it on the map. And some of the measures I would say that definitely you should be considering, and we've seen that also happening in the region, is around privatization. Privatization of maybe select high-profile sector entities. We as city have been extremely active in the region with this. As we speak today, for example, there's the IPO of Diwa in Dubai, where we are involved. The Aramco IPO in Saudi was also very successful and attracted foreign investors. Also the ADNOC distribution from Abu Dhabi. I'm just citing a few where we as city were involved and we saw the appetite. So this is definitely something that we think would play a key opportunity for foreign investors to consider actually their investment in Morocco. A couple of more things maybe to share as well is more around listed instruments like electronic traded funds, real estate, REITs, real estate investment trusts, as well as crowdfunding listing instruments. And also around the agenda of potential kind of strategic initiatives, be it from a taxation perspective or foreign exchange regulations, as well as central bank regulations that could help attract. And maybe finally, the final thing I'd like to share is around the Moroccan capital markets depth in driving where it's being driven by institutional investors rather than foreign investors, which is unlike other markets in the region. So I've heard about the supranational agency's mission to privatize some of the SOEs. This definitely a great initiative, and this would definitely allow the Moroccan government to lead by example. You also asked me in terms of the second part of the question was it around the role of the global bank city? Okay,
yes,
and
you
how
are
do we
very
contribute?
active in Morocco in capital markets. We would like to hear how you can attract more.
Sure, and so I mean,
and
as far as our contribution to Morocco capital pool, so our role as a global bank is to accompany Moroccan companies, locally, and as they look at opportunities also globally. So that's one of the things that we play a key role with as they expand regionally and globally. But we also play a very active role around international companies that are doing business in Morocco, which is a segment that we call our global clients. That also is they arrive to the country, they say Citi's there, we deal with Citi globally, you know, how can Citi help us understand the opportunities, bank, etc., make the right introduction. So this is a very important segment, which is we call the multinational corporates, and as well as the role that we play with our public sector clients, but also with our financial institutions. So the role we play with banks, with the major Moroccan banks, also with the central bank, in helping also move funds around the world. So these are some of the contributions that we make with being on the ground as an institution, and definitely our ability to showcase and bring our international investors into the market through various opportunities.
Thank you so much for your insights. It was very interesting and fascinating to see your commitment for Morocco and since when you started. So happy to have you there to share with you your views. We will now turn to the leading domestic bank in Morocco, Ismail Douiri. The audience will be keen to hear more about your insights on the dynamics driving the demand and supply of capital in the market. A first question will be, how will you describe the long-term risk-return profiles and level of volatility to international investors who are not familiar to our market? And maybe, as a separate but related question, we all know that intangible factors play a key role to attract international investors. What will be your views on this? Transparency, equity research, data. Now we know that we are in a world driven by data, so I would hear more on this from you.
Sure, thank you very much. And forgive me if I start with things that may be obvious to some of you, but these are questions I get as often the counterpart to international investors. So Morocco, when you look at, from very far away at some figures like, let's say, GDP per capita or literacy rate or proportion of Moroccans who live outside the cities, it looks like a low mid-income country, a country in the $3,500 per capita revenue, still a long way from development, and then a long way from a sophisticated financial market. And I think our role here is to give you keys to understand what's behind the surface. And one of the interesting things is to understand that often Morocco, unfortunately, is still two countries within one. So the cities are not $3,500 per capita. They don't look like that. They look more like a $10,000 per capita country. So same thing if you look at 40% of the population who lives outside the cities, but in fact agriculture is only 15% of GDP. And so you have a very diversified economy. You also have a very strong partnership with the EU that forces permanent alignment of our regulation to the best standards and a very open economy with regards to many aspects. And we heard earlier that, for instance, inflow and outflow of capital is totally free, with no restriction, with immediate action. The Forex market is very transparent. The exchange mechanism is also very transparent, with a peg to a basket of US dollar and euro, 40-60, and a band of fluctuation with total freedom of exchange within banks without recurring to the central bank. In fact, since the reform, we have not used the central bank as a resource, except in some situations where they took excess liquidity of foreign exchange from the banking system. So a very stable currency, very predictable, and totally open to international investors. A very stable macro with a good yield curve, very easy to read, not very volatile, with low interest rates, low inflation. So all this is very conducive, I would say, to your interaction with the the market. And maybe another important element is to understand that we are a constitutional monarchy and we have the best of both worlds. We have very long-term, very stable policy, good direction, vision, and we have regular, transparent elections that bring a coalition to power as government. And so we're used to consensus. We're used to making sure that whenever a decision or a law is voted, it has gone through a number of filters with strong consensus and strong popular, I would say, sharing or willingness to move towards those reforms. At the corporate level, I think it's also very important for you to sense that what's happening inside the companies. How do companies operate? How do boards decide? First, it's a capitalist country, really capitalist. So people are driven by growth, are driven by profitability, are discussing the same metric as you would see in any developed market. There is also a very strong institutional shareholding in many listed companies, in all listed companies. So that also provides a lot of professionalism within boards, a lot of scrutiny by specialized committees, etc. So corporate governance is, again, something that is very important for you if you intend to invest or even interact with large companies, companies that are, I would say, in the position to interact with international investors. You very often find professional management, people who are hired for their skills, not because of their family relationship to any of the shareholders. You obviously, and we heard that, have an environment where regulation and laws are very well written, very aligned with international standards, and at the same time forward-looking with many reforms, many new introductions, sometimes ahead of the need. So many of the instruments that were exposed to you today are not necessarily demanded by the domestic market, but they are necessary for the next reform of the capital markets. And all this shows in market indicators. When you look at returns, for instance, we don't have the returns that you would expect from an emerging or a frontier market. We are not countries where you can get easily 30 or 40% returns and then have a shock the following year. What you have is a stable return in US dollars. So you would get, if you look at comparison between the indices, you look at the domestic index for equity, it returns over the past 5 years, and obviously this is not a fantastic period, 6.2% per year versus the average of the MSCI emerging at 7.2%. But you have much lower volatility. So when the MSCI was showing volatilities of 20%, Morocco was showing only 14% volatility. You see that also in valuations and cost of equity. So people who understand Morocco don't expect a lot in terms of returns. They would have a cost of equity around 8-9%, and hence valuations are high. So when you look at it again from a spreadsheet, you say, oh, Morocco is expensive. No, it's not. It's totally justified by the cash flows, the predictability of the cash flows, and the expectations of investors. Same thing we hear a lot, Morocco is not liquid. It's not deep. There is no volume, etc. Yeah, but there is this notion I heard yesterday in the presentation that I loved, which is hidden liquidity. What does it mean? Whenever we had to execute a large transaction on the stock exchange, blocks were available without a big spread. People are willing to consider large transactions. They're not showing that because they're not active traders. They're institutional investors. They sit on large blocks. But when there is an opportunity, we have brokers who know where the blocks are, and they know how to unlock that block. So when you see on the surface $15 million per day volume, it shows, it seems to an investor who wants to invest 100 million that it will take them weeks. it's not true. They can execute 100 million, 200 million in just one block. So there is hidden liquidity there, and there is a sophisticated network of brokers who know where to find the blocks. I would like to finish with
Please,
maybe give you an example of us as an issuer. We tap seriously into the market by having really recourse to many instruments. So if you look at, for instance, the capital needs, we have a market cap of 10 billion euros approximately. And we have raised, over the past 10 years, 700 million euros in equity from the market. We have issued 500 million in additional tier one, so sophisticated products with a number of optionalities behind. We have raised also 1.2 billion euros in tier two instruments. And then for liquidity, we permanently currently have on our balance sheet 6 billion in certificate of deposits. We have used securitization, 300 million euros in securitization. Our subsidiaries, so Wafa Salaf is in consumer finance, Wafa Bai is in leasing, have raised a total of 65 million euros in tier two. They have issued for their liquidity 1.7 billion euros in bonds. They have used securitization for 93 million. And the good thing is that every time there is a reform in the market, we use it also as an issuer. So when you know how to use it, it's a very deep and useful market. And we replicate that in our presence outside of Morocco. So we contribute, in a sense, to also accelerating reforms and depth of regional markets around us in West Africa and in Tunisia. So I don't know if I answered all your questions, because you had also a question about transparency, etc.
Exactly.
Maybe I'll leave that to other, because I spoke too much.
No problem. It was really very insightful. And thank you very much to give us a vision of Morocco, or the Moroccan opportunity beyond some figures and spreadsheets, and to have all what I maybe retain from your presentation is two keywords: stability and visibility. So this is very important when you have to analyze the Moroccan opportunity. So thanks again. Now, to complement maybe this overview, Mr. Khalid Nasser, your institution led a significant volume of transaction. We look forward to hearing your insight and perspective on how the supply of instruments evolved over time, and which instruments offer maybe currently appealing opportunities for investors.
Yes, thank you. I would say, as my colleague Ismail Douiri, as a bank, we are also an issuer. And of course,
active in the market.
Yes, we use all the instruments. He mentioned 81, Tier 2, certificate of deposit, but we encourage also the other issuers to use these instruments to enhance their balance sheet and their liquidity. It is difficult to have an overview of the market during the last 2 years. I recall that we faced 2 years of a pandemic crisis, and I think that the investors all over the world focused more on their domestic market, on less risky assets and less risky markets. However, the Moroccan market was very resilient, and the economic also of Morocco was very resilient. As mentioned before, the Morocco engaged lots of reforms to enrich and widen the range of instruments that he can offer to investors, be it Moroccan or foreigners. We talked about equity, corporate bond, the treasury bills, but we talk also about, maybe Nofalda will talk about it, real estate funds. We are in a process to launch a ETF, futures. We talked about lending securities, but also other derivatives. I think all these instruments are enough wide with a regulation aligned with the standards, international standards, that can attract foreign investors.
Thank you so much. It's really very interesting. And the key word that I return is resilience. And this resilience of the Moroccan capital market, it's also due that we have a sophisticated and strong local actor that can support, in fact, the economy and the financial market during this crisis. And we will probably have to face, unfortunately, future crises. So the resilience of this, the whole financial system is a key competitive advantage for our country, definitely. Let's dive into the stock market, and more specifically on the issuer perspectives. Mr. Majid, almost 10 years after the successful IPO of JLEC, which was 7 times oversubscribed, we have the pleasure to host you in this panel to share your experience in the listing process as a regional leading energy developer. So we would love to hear more about your experience and the rationale behind listing a regional company in the Casablanca exchange, stock exchange. Sorry.
Thank you. Is it on? Yeah, it works. Okay. Thank you, Mariam, for the question. What I want to try to do is to link basically the energy infrastructure and the financial markets. And I think without an energy infrastructure, we don't necessarily have an active capital market, because we don't have, the consumer demand. We don't have an economy that can grow at a certain pace, but at the same time, without having the financial resources to develop the energy infrastructure, then, it's the egg and the chicken thing. So our story dates back to 1995, when the government of Morocco decided to privatize the power generation. And at that time, in 1995, I think if we put ourselves back then in perspective, we had about 18% of our rural population that had access to electricity. 10 years later, or a little bit, maybe 10, 11 years later, we were in a ratio of 97 and 98% of the Moroccan population that had access to electricity. And I think that was translated into one of the eras of the highest growth economic decade probably in the recent history of Morocco. Now, back in 1995, we represented something like 60% of the energy production. Nowadays, we're probably a little bit less. We're significantly less. We should be around 38%. And in 2013, we decided to enter the experience of the public listing, I think for 3 main reasons. One of the reasons would be, I think, strengthening the governance. I think sometimes being publicly listed, being watched, being scrutinized, it's extremely helpful for management and shareholders to instill discipline and transparency. And I think as such, I think our share performance has, and I think been, I would say, enjoying a strict governance framework. Our share performance has reflected, I think, the governance framework, and I think the share price since listing in 2013 to recently has performed over, basically the performance is 200%. So that basically goes to add a little bit more to what Ismail and Khalid were saying. And at the same time, this may not necessarily please my friend the bankers. Our cost of debt has gone down by more than 30%. So I think those are the 2 main economic benefits and drivers that we have basically captured through the listing.
It's a positive driver.
It
so
is.
You
No,
can
it was just a joke, but I think
everyone benefits from it, even bankers.
Those are the direct, I would say, the most direct consequences or positive consequences that we've had. And add to that, I would say, I think the governance structure that we've been able to put in place that allows us to basically instill trust between us and our stakeholders, and stakeholders being the different investors and shareholders, being the government, which is our off-taker and basically host government, but also the employees. I think there is a very important element. All stakeholders' interests are aligned, so the company performs really well. I would say also the share performance would give flexibility to entities such as TAQA Morocco to be able to tap into different pockets of, I think, liquidity and different avenues to finance their growth, understanding that today's market is headed towards decarbonation and headed towards active investment in unregulated or what we call corporate PPAs, power purchase agreements in the market. So I would say, to recap, access to capital and different pockets of capital. Second, I think the governance, and third, I think the economic impact of reducing our cost of debt.
Thank you so much for sharing this experience and providing us with a concrete example from the energy sector, a key sector in the context of our new model of development. So energy is something that is very important, and you are right. It's a common destiny between financial segment, energy sector segment, and economy, our ambition as an industrial hub also. So for now, we will explore another listing story in the alternative asset space, this time, which demonstrates also the flexibility of the capital market architecture and its ability to innovate. Naufel, you have both the experience of private and public markets in the real estate sector. In addition to this, you recently took one of your platforms to the public market in a challenging macroeconomic environment due to COVID crisis. We would love to hear more about this experience and share with us. So you are listed since December 2020.
That's right. Yeah, we're
so you find the perfect
the
timing
new
for
kid in the
listing.
block, right?
Okay.
Yeah, we're the smallest guy. I'm actually humbled to be around this panel because we're like this and everybody's like, whoa. So thank you guys for accepting that I'd be part of this. A couple things, and I think you mentioned the private equity part, and I think it's important maybe to go back and highlight that, because we wouldn't and I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't, first of all, for the success of the private equity part and the initial story. And that's important.
I'm fully supportive, please.
Yeah, as a private equity player, I think you know what that means. And so it's really important, and I think in our story, the history relies on a lot of the fundamentals that we're talking about. And I think, Ismail, you mentioned some of the key things. And to be honest, that every foreign investor I've spoken to, even before I've joined the country, even before 2010 when I entered Morocco, and for 14 years prior to that, I was analyzing Morocco as a country amongst others. And so the first things you look at are very basic, and sometimes we don't even realize in the country how advanced we are in these dynamics until we actually get to dive in. The framework, the infrastructure, whether from the maturity of the LLC company laws, La Société Anonyme, has such a maturity in country that you wouldn't be able to tell from outside. The tax framework, the foreign exchange framework, and amongst us, sometimes we're very critical, and we're always about, well, what's the next step? Well, no, but we need this, and we don't have this, and we need this. But in reality, from a comparative perspective, and when you compare other countries that are being put in the same category, we're way ahead of the game, and the sophistication is there. So that's one element that was important for the success of the private equity story. Second element that was very important, and we touched on it, but I really want to highlight it even more. It's the technical expertise. When you look at, simple things, legal consultants, tax consultants. You know how many countries, from a tax consultant perspective, when you ask a question, and I'm not talking about the level of taxes, it could be 50%, it could be 20%. That's not what, as a foreign investor, matters to me. What matters to me is when I ask a question, I get a direct, simple answer. It's X. And the ability for us to have that infrastructure of consultants and that tax framework that's so clear that you're able to get a straight answer, hey, it's X. And that certainty takes away a lot of the uncertainty from the equation. What I was surprised with as well on the private equity side, and just to give you some figures, we raised about 150 million euros in equity for this equity story prior to listing. And raising that was 2/3 foreign investment and only 1/3 local investment. We had the South African pension fund, the government's pension fund that joined us. We had the EBRDs. So we had some large institutions who were able to jump in with us on the private equity side. And the only way they were able to do that, again, is when they understand the depth of the potential liquidity, the hidden liquidity. The story of the hidden liquidity is very important because until you understand that, you don't make that initial step. Because, you know, I remember discussions where, well, hold on, ×4, that means I'm going to exit out of a 120 million euro ticket on a small company like this. That's not possible. Guess what? They have exited. It's done, and on a cycle of 4 years. And so to tell you that from that perspective, it does exist. And then the fourth one, which to me is extremely important, is the debt markets. And I'm not talking just about corporate debt when it comes to the banks and their ability to support the company, but we've had an amazing story as a young company, as a public issuer already, or an issuer of public debt prior to listing, as a commercial paper issuer post-listing, and I think that sophistication of the debt market that we take sometimes for granted is actually, again, let's talk about it comparatively to other markets where we invest. And comparatively, you find that sophistication in the country. And so what's maybe the advantage of all this is that you've de-risked that investment from a lot of these elements that are considered to be higher risk in other markets. What's the flip side? Is yes, maybe you don't have that excess return. You're not at that, you know, double return that you're looking for. But you have the
excess risk also.
But to be honest, that has been one of, and not anymore, but for quite some time on our roadshows, that has been one of the most challenging discussions. You know, we do these roadshows constantly, whether through the European investors or everyone now who basically looks at our markets from a frontier perspective, or who's got a fund that REITs or real estate or anything that's liable to potentially go in there. We talked to, and the initial discussions were all about risk-adjusted return. Now we're having different discussions, I must say. The discussions are very different. They're no longer about risk-adjusted return. Today, the discussions are about growth, and how much growth is there still in the next phase. What does it mean? What is the new development model? How does this work for a company like yours? I'm going to stop here because I know there's quite a few other things, but I think we can talk a bit more about some of the ESG elements and other aspects of the story. But in short, I think the success of the private equity part of our story has been key to our so far success as a very young listed company on the stock exchange. Thank you.
Thank you for highlighting the private equity industry. It's my role, but thank you to take this. I would like just maybe to mention something that you said. I mean, talent. We forget that this is one of our key assets as a country, and sophisticated talent. And this can be a real basis for our infrastructure to grow our market and to achieve our ambitions. So, to gradually shift toward the second part of the panel, we will touch upon other recent trends and opportunities offered by the stock market. Mr. Benjeloun, Younes, your institution is a top-tier bank with an active department in the capital market. Following up those listing experiences in the energy, private equity, real estate sectors, what is your opinion on the current state? And more importantly, what are the recent trends and opportunities for all the potential investors in the audience. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. I want to start by two things. Two things I'm proud of today, and I didn't expect or intend to do this. I don't know if from up there you can see this front line here. We are in a country of our brothers from the Emirates, but in front of me here I see 4 authorities represented by ladies in 2 Arab countries. And to me this is I'm really proud of this. The second thing, I've been doing these kind of panels and roadshows along with Ismail for almost 30 years now. And this is the first time that I'm proud that every single one of us has done it in English. Okay? It was absolutely not the case. People used to speak French, but everyone has done it, has made the effort, has prepared and done it in English. That's critical for financial markets, for international investors and so on, okay? I have nothing against any other language, but you have to be an English speaker if you want to attract foreign investors from around the world. Well, okay, this being said, I'm going to move to the heart of the discussion. The first thing that people tell me whenever I talk to foreign investors is that beyond everything that has been said, which is absolutely fundamental, is, well, we're tired of your market. We have had exactly the same companies forever. Okay? It's not true to begin with, but the reality is that first, we have had for the past 30 years 75 listed companies. The number has absolutely not changed over 30 years. So that's the number one problem. The reality is that those 75 companies that we have today are absolutely not the same as the ones we had 30 years ago. Actually, we had 40 that left, and we attracted 40 new companies to the market. But that's not enough. We shouldn't have stayed at the exact same number. Now, we know that the new economic development model intends to double or triple, quadruple the number. It doesn't matter what the figure is. What matters is, how are we going to do that? Who's going to come to the market? That's the big question that we need to answer. And I hope I will bring some answers and some suggestions to the audience altogether. First, to answer what Elisar said in the beginning, we have already had a first wave of privatizations. Actually, we have had 2 waves of privatizations. In the mid-90s, we had a wave of privatizations in the cement sector, in the mining, and so on. And then it was followed by a few private sector IPOs. And then we had a much bigger wave in terms of size. We had the telecom company that came to the market, which attracted for the first time 120,000 retail investors that had never heard about the stock market, okay? Following that, what happened? And that's extremely important for the upcoming years. In the 3 years that followed the IPO of the telecom company, we have had 25 IPOs from the private sector. Basically, we had 1 IPO every single month. So when I say this, for those who have, we're all old here. We don't have people who have come to market recently. But when I tell this to the guys who are working with us in our teams who are, 30, 35 years old, they say, like, it's impossible. It's fake. It's wrong. Well, it is possible. The IMC, the authority, was able to manage 1 IPO every month. The market was able to absorb 1 IPO every month. That means, what does that mean? It means that demand is here. Capital is available. Offer is not around the corner. So we need to do something to change this offer. That means to bring more companies to the market. We have big institutional investors. We know how to attract foreign investors. We have had much higher levels of foreign investment penetration in Morocco. We were at levels that were triple today's level, quadruple today's level, but people left because it became a very slow, same type of stock, same market. So people got bored and they wanted to go somewhere where there was more fun, basically. Yeah? Now, what can we do? I think if you look at the market today and our economy, you will notice one thing very, very important. We have several sectors that are absolutely not listed. And we have three categories of sectors that are not listed. The first one includes older companies, old economy companies, which are quite big. Textile and garment, zero listing. Agriculture, agribusiness, zero listing. Education, zero listing. Health, zero listing, okay? So these kind of old sectors, we have to go and talk to these people among others. So this is the old sector that is yet to be listed and is not listed. The second group, for me, is the group of already emerged new industries in Morocco that we don't hear, we Moroccans know a lot about, but foreign investors don't know much about. For those who don't know, Morocco produces 500,000 cars a year. And this is two companies, but actually, it's not the two companies that matter the most. It's what have they created in terms of ecosystem of domestic, of JVs. It's more than 250 companies in that sector. And this sector is a $10 billion exporting sector. Zero company on the market. Good. One more sector, outsourcing. Outsourcing is a sector that employs 150,000 people. In Morocco, some companies have presence in other countries. No one is listed from that sector. I think I had even another important sector, aeronautics. Aeronautics as well. We have tens and tens and tens of companies with, I think, close to $2 billion of exports. And tens of companies supplying Airbus and Boeing, and we don't see anything yet, okay? So this is what I call already emerged sectors. But all of this will be possible, and I think we need a spark. We need a spark. The market is ready. The buyers are ready. The infrastructure is ready. Foreign investors will be ready. Whenever we call them for something attractive, they will come. And this spark, and then I'll go back to you, we need another big privatization that will bring to the market 200 or 500,000 people this time around. And everybody has guessed already what I'm going to talk about. What I want to talk about is phosphate. The phosphate company, we have domestic leaders on the market, banks, cement, you name it. We have regional leaders in the market. We have continental leaders in the market. And we only have one company that is a world leader. And this company, which is the star among all stars, is not listed. I know it's not easy. The government is very well represented here. But we're not asking for a huge listing. The idea is that this company, I value it around $20 billion. If we introduce just this company alone, it's an extra 20% of GDP. It's my valuation personal. It doesn't engage. It's just according to public figures. And this company is already in terms of governance, in terms of reporting, in terms of financials, in terms of information, everything is already readily available. They already issue bonds on the domestic market, on the international market. They're already fully transparent. So this could be the biggest spark we can hope for. And I think most people will join me to say that it's an ideal. We dream about it, and we would love to have it. And it would really put Morocco back on the radar of a much larger number of foreign investors.
What happened to the paper he gave you before? Because I don't think that was written on it. I mean, is there a sanction or something? You know, you take away his microphone or something, because this cannot...
But thank you for this direct and frank approach. I mean...
Yes.
Yes, please.
And I forgot to mention that in Morocco, we have a permanent and good quality dialogue between private sector and public sector.
For sure, the potential is there. We need to unlock. And thank you very much, Younes, because you give me the great transition for the next round of questions for this panel. So let me get back to Elisa. Building on your cross-country exposure in the region, as well as your own personal experience in the financial industry, We would be glad to hear more about your outlook for the Moroccan capital market, and more importantly, what will be the key criteria or the secret sauce to attract new investors willing to increase their exposure to frontier markets.
I learned a lot just being part of the panel, and I think the question you just asked me is already very well answered. I think Yunus made a phenomenal positioning. But I mean, from my perspective, where we sit as an international organization, let's say, representing international investors, I mean, a couple of things that an international investor would look at, or foreign investor. Stability is key, and Morocco definitely offers the political stability. The positioning of the market, be it from a time zone perspective or even kind of the connectivity, Africa to Europe to the US, so that, you know, that's definitely there in terms of the positioning. We spoke about the risk reward. I mean, you have different types of investors. You know, from a risk reward, you shared with us some of the numbers. You know, close to a 6% volatility of 14%, as opposed to 7% with maybe double the volatility. Some investors would definitely put a lot of weight there. But the whole thing then is around the supply and the demand, right? Not to repeat what's been discussed, but on the supply side, clearly, you know, the market needs to offer opportunities, right? And Yunus just made the whole speech, so which I endorse in terms of how we create kind of the opportunities. But on the demand side, I don't think there's, at least from what we hear from the investors, the demand is there, but then the opportunity needs to follow. And clearly some of the things that naturally, I mean, part of, if we want to call this the roadshow, and what the Capital Markets Authority is doing today in Dubai is showcasing the opportunity, but clearly doing a roadshow, talking about the opportunity, the infrastructure that is available, the regulation, etc., are kind of the steps that one would be taking. But it all goes around the supply and the demand, and making sure that the supply is there. So that would be more or less extremely key to make available.
Thank you so much. It's very important to have this diversification of instruments available to trade, and innovation also in terms of legal framework, to have a room for innovative companies to be able to consider IPO as a potential, exit for investors. Thank you so much. In order to dive into the demand side, Ismail, how could the Moroccan market position itself as an attractive option for foreign issuers this time, and to increase and strengthen this demand side?
Yeah, I think we, through the discussion, we showed how infrastructure was ready with a financial system that is not only of critical size at the continental level. When you do some benchmarks, you will find that there are two countries that are totally outside the map in Africa. It's Morocco and South Africa, on all dimensions related to financial system. So we have a strong infrastructure. We have the critical size. We are starting to have the talent. It's probably not large enough, not experienced enough, but we're already at the second generation of people who have lived the first reform in the early 90s. So we have this, I would say, soft or intangible factors that you were describing. We have the good quality regulation that, for instance, now force us, issuers, to disclose on a quarterly basis, to have IFRS reporting, to have consolidated accounts for all companies who have significant subsidiaries. We see also efforts by issuers to use the English language It's not yet mandatory, but maybe it could become, that's also an idea, just to push or to again, stimulate and reinforce this level. We have companies that have permanent contact with investors at least twice a year in conferences, etc. So all this is already available with research both at the domestic level, international level. We have this, I would say, culture of under-promise and over-deliver. When you look at, for instance, all business plans that are required by the regulator for an IPO over the recent period, all business plans have been not only respected, but how can I say it? Huh? Exceeded. So this is the picture that we're drawing of a market. So why isn't it used more by other issuers around us? And what is our target market for issuers? I would argue that so far there was a major constraint related to currency control. So as much as currency is totally open for international investors to invest and repatriate, an issuer who is not a domestic issuer cannot tap into our domestic savings. They cannot even borrow, for instance. So you cannot short the dirham. You cannot borrow in dirham and sell it. So we heard that this reform will open the way to this avenue, and I would argue that our target market is a market where we see large companies that already issue outside of their country. And for me, the number one country is Nigeria. When I see Nigerian banks go to London to do their issuance, I don't know why, because it's very expensive for them. Maybe it's because of the London experience. But in a sense, I think we can have a very competitive product. And so it's very important for us to also build the alliances with other regional exchanges. I think the argument for foreign issuers is very simple. It's really cheaper, easier, with the same level of quality of service. It would involve also some change in our institutional investors' posture, because they are, again, for cultural reasons, not willing to take risks they don't understand. So it has to come progressively. It has to come with a lot of scrutiny for the initial successes, the initial issuance. They have to be a success, but I'm certain that the reform will be conducive to this kind of operations. Maybe one word also about investors. We talked about all the reasons why they are present and they should be more present. But I think there is another one that we should mention, is this project of the stock exchange, of having the African exchange linkage project, whereby the stock exchange is linked to other stock exchanges and the brokers of Morocco can execute transactions in other regional markets. So all these, and I think we're ready already, from what I heard, we're ready already for some countries like BRVM, the regional West African stock exchange, for Nigeria, and soon for Mauritius, Egypt, and Nairobi. So it means that all of a sudden we have a hub that is open to issuers and investors based in Morocco, around also another important initiatives that we have not mentioned so far, which is Casablanca Finance City. So Casablanca Finance City offers a number of attractive proposals to investors or actors who want to base their African business out of Morocco, out of Casablanca.
Thank you so much. So what I understand is that we need to unlock the local potential in Morocco, but we have also to position Morocco as a real hub for African countries, especially that the banks will have probably a key role for this approach to the African issuers, given that you have already leading position in Africa and can really attract these potential companies to the Casablanca exchange, stock exchange. So, Mr. Khalid Nasr, what would be your take on the role of domestic banks to position Morocco as a regional hub and achieve its strategic objective that we understand are extremely ambitious in the context of the new model of development?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to come back to what Ismail said. BMC Bank, it was called BMC Bank, now it's Bank of Africa. BMC Bank was maybe one of the first issuer in the London market with GDR, Global Deposit Receipts, in the late of 90s. We were the first corporate bank to issue an Eurobond in international market. That means that Moroccan companies can raise money outside Morocco. OCP did the same 2 years after us. To complete Yunus, of course we need to have a large company in the stock market, but it's not enough. The economy of Morocco is based on 90% of the Moroccan company is SMEs. We have to bring SMEs to the market. We have large SMEs in the Morocco, so we need to bring them to the market. If you bring only one large company, of course you attract large investors, individual investors. Then you have a wave of 3 months and then nothing else happened. So I think to have a dynamic and deep market, you have to bring SMEs to Moroccan market. And I diverge from my friends about hidden liquidity. Normally, a transparent market must have, I would say, transparent liquidity. Otherwise, only I would say the insiders player have access to that liquidity. So we need to have transparent liquidity. And to have it, we need to bring more SMEs to the market, more liquidity to the market. No, not yet. I didn't interrupt you. So what is the role of the banks to make the capital markets more efficient? First, I have to recall that banks are among the main shareholders of Casablanca Stock Exchange, and they support and encourage all the reforms and the upgrade of technical architecture. And banks, Moroccan banks, are under the same regulations as the international banks. So they are under Basel II, IFRS, etc., etc. So they need to appreciate the risks better. They need to have better allocation of their capital. So they will push their clients, and particularly the SMEs, to be more transparent, more organized. And I think these SMEs will have access then easier to financing, be it with banks or through capital markets. It can be bonds, corporate bonds, or equity. Last but not least, it has been mentioned by Ismail, the larger, the most, I would say, big banks of Morocco are continental, are Pan-African banks, and they finance operators in Morocco, but they finance also operators in Africa. This can lead to a better integration, I think, of our capital markets. And I will end by saying that Morocco has planned to join the LACIDEO, which is the economic Western African economy. And this is also a lever, enabler to a better integration.
Perfect. Thank you so much. You're right. Yes, please.
I just wanted to make sure that I was not misunderstood. It's very important. By no one, not just by Khalid, who's a big friend. No. I said, we did Morocco Telecom, and then we had 25 IPOs. What I want to explain is that if we were to do, not the first it doesn't have to be the first one. OCP doesn't have to be the first one. I said, we are probably at the big arc, but if we do this, we need to finance our companies, our economy. We're not doing this just to say, okay, we went from 75 to 150 listed. It doesn't matter. It doesn't make any sense. What we need is to attract SMEs, as I mentioned, all the sectors that are yet to be represented. We need to convince those people to come to the market. We need to convince them that they can find all the capital they need to grow. We need to convince them that if they have ambition, if they want to grow, if they want to go out of the country like the banks did 10 years ago, they can do so, and money is available in Morocco, be it from Moroccans or from foreign investors. If we put such a big company on the market, you will mainly attract foreign investors. Moroccans already know this company. You put Morocco on the radar. But I agree with you, this is not going to make a difference on financing the economy. Financing the economy means financing SMEs. And those are the sectors I mentioned. I mentioned all the sectors that are yet to be represented. So yes, one is the window. It's like a window in a boutique. And the rest is obviously the heart of the business is to finance SMEs, for sure. I agree 100%.
Younes, you are perfect for a transition, even if we haven't prepared in advance. The capital market definitely serves the growth of the real economy. And coming back to your experience, Majid, the listing of GLEC happened the same year the national energy strategy was adopted. I mean, what is the opportunity set derived from the fast-growing energy market in Morocco?
Well, I will go back in time because I think the energy, first, I think Morocco was the first country in the region, in the MENA region in 1995, to privatize its power generation. And then it was, I think, one of the first countries to develop at that time with Liquidity, le Centre de Développement des Énergies Renouvelables in 1999, to create a framework for renewable energy, and then what we call nowadays the energy transition. Then 2009, we created the Moroccan Agency for Moroccan Sustainable Energy Agency, and there was a plan to develop basically and to promote the energy transition, the renewables, and in 2020, we were one of the few countries that has achieved 20% of its, and the numbers are actually very important, 20% of energy production is from renewable sources. In capacity factor, that's about 38%. So 38% of the country's capacity is from renewable, but 20% is from actually production. And that's actually also a very important ratio because it gives you almost, I think, 55%, which is the resource that you have. And if, I think probably there are experts in the energy sector here in this room or probably following this conference, but the conversion ratio from capacity to production for the renewable is usually much lower than that. For the solar is around 20%, for the renewable is usually around 35%, but in Morocco, we are at 50 plus, 55 plus. And that leads us to basically what has taken place and highlighted by the new model of economic development that was published last year under the guidance of His Majesty, and that calls for a 6% growth of GDP per year until 2035. And that's basically 12,000 additional megawatts. So we will be doubling our capacity, and the main development or the biggest portion of the development will come from the renewable. And there was a regulator that was established dedicated to the energy sector. I think it was 3 years ago, and now it's active. It's just issued the grid code. There is a new law which is called the Law 4019, which is in Parliament to be voted, that will facilitate and accelerate the energy transition. So I think there is a huge drive, and again, I said it early on in my first intervention that financial markets and the energy sector are intertwined and very closely linked, and we see that true. That's very true, even for the energy transition, where there is a call or there is an acceleration of decarbonation, especially with the volatility that we see now on the fossil fuels, and we've reached historical highs. So I think the impact is absolutely incredible, and we are happy and we are grateful for our renewable, basically baseload, or not baseload, but generation that we have. And with the new economic development model, the regulator, and the new law 4019, I think there is room for a competitive, green, reliable energy source in Morocco, which is one of the key decision drivers for investment, I think, in a country. If you talked about, Younes, about 500,000 cars being built in Morocco, and I've heard recently a speech of the Minister of Industry, Commerce and Industry, positioning Morocco as the third country after India and China in terms of cost of producing cars. And I think there is the ambition to move to number one. I think one of the ways to move to number one is access to affordable, cheaper, and greener energy. And we can only do that with our friends from the financial markets. So it always comes down to money.
And this will increase the resilience also of our model and
Absolutely.
our industry, definitely. Thank you, Majid, for this overview of the energy markets. We will follow on the topic of sectorial opportunities. In the case real estate, Naufel, how is the sector currently evolving? And what are the trends, such as sectorial but also ESG impact, you can observe as an active asset manager?
Thank you. If you may, I'll answer that question, but I'll have to wear two hats. One of them is the real estate or the commercial real estate hat and the company hat, but also the Moroccan Association of Capital Market Issuers hat. I think just bouncing off what was said here, I'm hearing sometimes things as a new guy in the market, maybe that I have not seen. And I go back to our listing, and you know the story very well. We did a private placement in May of 2020. And commercial real estate not being, or yield real estate not being a category or an asset class that most financial markets are in Morocco familiar with. And we made a decision in June to go for a listing in 2020. And I'll tell you what was the reaction of everybody around the table, even as soon as we came out of the board. You'll never do it. There's no way. There's no listing that happens, within a couple of months. You can never do a listing in Morocco within a couple of months. Guess what? We've done it. Regulator worked with us. The stock exchange worked with us. Guess what? There was hurdles in the legislation that did not even allow the company to be listed. Guess what happened? The regulator got on board right away. Legislation was changed right away to actually enable us to be able to that listing before the end. And sometimes I hear everybody talking about change that needs to come. I'd like to invite everyone to think for a second. I think the change happened. Let's be careful about legacy thinking. And in our minds, we think things are still more difficult. In our mind, we think things are still cumbersome and they're not feasible. And maybe we're conveying that message around us, but in reality, they're no longer that way. In reality, it's very easy today to have access to the capital markets. It's just maybe that we still have some history in our mind, and that's being a bit of a hurdle. In terms of commercial real estate, to answer your question, commercial real estate as an asset class or yield real estate does not exist as a proper sector in my view. This is a shocking statement I always say just to get everybody's attention. It's not a sector. It's a financing mechanism for all the other sectors. You think about where commercial real estate is, and you healthcare, you need hospitals and clinics. You think prisons, and we need real estate. You think schools, and we need real estate. You think every industrial part that you go into. You think logistics. So commercial real estate and yield real estate is actually just a financier. And we are in the process of introducing a new financier in the economy. There's a big game changer that also happened maybe that we all talk about, but we underestimate. The new development model. The state is saying, I'm out, you guys will take care of this stuff. This is a big statement. This is a highway of opportunity that just opened. And so I'll stop it at that and wear my now association hat. Part of the reason, and I think we've been invited by some of the listed companies, and it's an issuers association. It's not just the listed companies, so it's all public market issuers. So the list is more 170 rather than 75. And we got together to talk about, well, why do we still have that legacy thinking? What are the things that as an association we can do to change the mindset of whether they're SMEs or whether they're large family offices or family institutions, that we need to convince that the jump over is not that difficult. And I think we're working now on an agenda of really targeted actions that go along the lines of, first of all, education. Second, holding hands, because a lot of these folks are intimidated by the process, but in reality now we demystified the process and we're holding hands. And the third thing that I think will be very helpful to everyone is whether from an environmental, from a social, or from a governance perspective, the whole theme of ESG today that's been talked about all around the world, and I can tell you there's what we identified as a group of issuers is that there is a phenomenal opportunity to simplify and create standards that are fully integrated and that we can help the Moroccan issuers to get on board with, because I think that was, or that's a missing link. You talk about renewable energy and how that's key. Social impact is another key. Gender matters are other key elements. And instead of them being check the box, these are things outside of the way a company functions, I think what the world is telling us they need to be is an integrated part of the function of a company. And I think the role of an association like ours is to help issuers get that fully integrated with the least amount of effort and cost, because there is a lot of sharing of experience that can happen. So I think with that in mind, frankly, I'm more on the side, maybe because I'm new, but I'm more on the side of there's not much needed. We just need to get working.
Great, perfect. Younes, building on the experience of Aradi, what will be in your contribution to make more companies like Aradi considering the option of capital market as an attractive and very viable financial option for their financing?
Honestly, I try to do it every single day, to be honest.
How we can help you?
It's not an individual who can do this, but I'm serious when I say I try to do it every single day. So every company that I talk to for all kinds of reasons, and it's not an easy process. You don't, if you pick any company that is, profitable, well-structured and so on, they're not always as ready as Aradi was to go public. Okay? That's extremely important, because people, if they don't have an intention to be transparent, to share the information with others, to report with certain standards, if they have their own family company, they don't need to go as much into detail. Aradi was already institutionalized in terms of capital, in terms of governance. A lot of things were up and ready. He said 2 months, we did it in no time. We did it together, and we did absolutely in no time. It was unbelievable. And IMMC, the authority, was here to help us do it in an amazing, I think it was a record. Huh? In the past 30 years, the record in terms of timing was Aradi. But what we need to do is, again, to convince the founders, the families, of the interest of going public. Why do they go public? They want to go public. They should go public if they have the ambition to grow. If a company doesn't want to grow, if it feels that it's comfortable making the profit that it's making at a given point of time, they will not do it, because there's an effort. We have to say it. I mean, it doesn't come with zero effort, but this effort pays off at the end tremendously if you intend to grow and intend to develop and so on. So we have some cultural problems we have to mention. I have to mention some obstacles, some issues that people are afraid of. And what I hear a lot is, well, my sector is, no one is listed in my sector yet. If I go public first, people will know everything about me and I will not know anything about them. So they will be competing against me with in an unfair situation, okay? But we do manage to convince some of them to, to be the leader. But the challenge here is to tell them, well, if you go first, then you'll be the first to do it. And we did it for the pharmaceuticals. We took the first pharmaceutical company public, and then another two followed suit, and so on and so forth.
So education is important. This is the first step. So
yes.
your role is first education.
Well, it takes years, actually. To be honest, it takes several years.
With this new
for family-owned companies to be convinced to do so. Yeah.
Maybe with this new generation coming to business, in family businesses.
It's really not a matter of generation. It's a matter of mindset of the founders or of the family, whether they really want to grow and go public immediately and continue to grow and so on, or not. Huh? Okay. That's my experience. Can I ask you a question? Is there going to be a Q&A thing or no?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to keep some info for the Q&A.
Many thanks for these insights. I have the pleasure now to open the floor for our audience to interact with the panel. We will probably take 1 or 2 questions. So please, now if someone has a microphone.
Yeah, maybe without.
If you can just introduce yourself and then...
I'm an entrepreneur in Morocco. Yunus, what are you? I know a lot of you here on the panel. I'm really proud to be here. It's just coincidence that we happen to be in Dubai. So kudos to you guys. You represent Morocco really well. So thank you. A question that I've been trying to ask for a long time. I'm a former wealth manager, did it for a long time. And one of the reasons I don't invest in the stock market in Morocco is liquidity, number 1, and diversification. I can't diversify, I can't build a portfolio, I can't work on my asset classes and so on. What if we dreamed up a... Thank you. So what if we dreamed up a scenario where an ETF, like a Moroccan issued ETF, would have a specific asset allocation to the local market, and then the rest exposed to the immense amount of wealth being created in every market in the world. And then that will drag Morocco and will create liquidity. Then I could choose to get exposed to, say, Tesla or to Google or Facebook. And then you drag the Moroccan stock with you, because when you trade your ETF, you're going to generate liquidity for that portion that you leave for the Moroccan market. Is this something that's possible today with the law, or is this something being discussed? I think it would be amazing if we could pull that off. And then you could also tax them, because then the revenue you generate is going to be taxed in the Moroccan market. Thank you.
Shall we take another question before answering all the questions? Is there any other volunteer? Okay.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's such a privilege to be within this elite group and with 2, ministers. It's such an informative session. But I have just something in mind, because this session focused more on companies and investing in the market. But what about investors? So we need to talk about the other side of the, the equation, which is the investor. How can we restore the investors' confidence in the market? During turbulent time, investors lose their money, and we have to be there to comfort them and tell them this is like supply and demand, this is the market condition, but still we need to focus on the investor interest. When they lose in, their investment in bank, it's easier for them to accept it. But when it comes to this financial market or securities, it happens on a larger scale. So how can we, protect the investors, the other part of the equation? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Who wants to answer these 2 questions?
Yeah, I can try to answer the first question very briefly, and I'm sure everyone here has legally speaking, for individuals, because of foreign exchange controls, It's not really possible. It's not a technical issue. It's a foreign exchange control issue to begin with. Second, as Moroccans, we really want first to develop our own companies, and we want to finance our own companies. We're a small country yet. We don't have excess of capital to go and give money to others at this point. Although it's already the case, institutional investors are already allowed to invest outside the country. So an insurance company, a mutual fund can do what you have just said. They can do it tomorrow. It's already up and running. Anytime they can buy foreign assets. They have limits, but they can buy foreign assets of all sorts. But for individual investors, we still have capital controls for foreign investors, individuals, for foreign investments by individuals.
And maybe a quick note on the second question from, because it's a key topic that the association also talked about. I think markets, their volatility and their risk is something that in most of the frontier and emerging markets still is an ongoing process of education. And I think the role that we have is a role of accelerating the education process. It's accelerating the access to coverage, to analysis, to sectorial coverage, and in a way, making it accessible as well to non-sophisticated. These are public markets, so it has to be, I don't want to call it dummy, maybe is not the right word, but at least it has to be distilled and put in a way that can be accessible to the general public. And that's one of the key, I think, roles we identified as well as an association to say, well, how do we do this? Because it's only when you explain it that these investors or these retail investors are able to then understand and comprehend how it could be correlated to economic events. But at the end of the day, of course, there's an element of risk. It's more about whether they understand it or not before making that decision. I don't think we regret or feel bad from a psychology perspective when we lose on an investment that we understood the risks of. Because in a way we say, well, we anticipated that, we understood that risk, and so it's okay, I'm going to live with it. I think the disappointment comes really from a lack of understanding.
Thank you so much. To close this session, what will be your takeaway in one keyword, because we have no more time. So if you have one keyword for the audience, what will be your keyword? Elisa?
From my perspective, and I learned a lot today, opportunity is there with the platform in terms of, be it the regulations that have been worked on, infrastructure. The opportunity is definitely there. There is work in terms of, potentially talking more about the opportunity, but the pipeline needs to be worked on. And what I heard today from a very, a large IPO or encouraging SMEs, I think the balance is key. So diversifying the pipeline, but the opportunity is definitely there. We're very encouraged.
Ismail?
So in one sentence, not one word, always look below the surface.
Thank you.
I would say look at Morocco not only as a country, a simple country, but it's a gateway to Africa.
Definitely.
I'd say one statement, change has already happened, be part of it.
Yeah, I would say we have to be optimistic, ambitious, and I hope the word exists. Audacious, audacity, okay? These are three words for me that are key from my point.
Énergie, non. Je pense beaucoup plus. Hein? No, after you, it's difficult. I think we talked a lot about the new economic model, about transition, and I think about opportunities that exist in the market, but they are there, and I think we need to get to the point where they're no longer opportunities, we are converting them. So I think everybody is waiting for the conversion. Let's make them real. And an opportunity is only there if we can convert it and make it happen. So I think that's where we are here today. I think we have all the ingredients, and I hope that next time we talk about what we have achieved.
Definitely. Thank you so much for all your panelists. To close this session, I invite Mr. Tariq Senhaji, CEO of the Casablanca Stock Exchange. Thank you.
Excellency, Minister of Digital Transformation and Administrative Reform, Madam President of the Moroccan Capital Market Authority, Dr. CEO of the Securities and Commodities Commission of the UAE, Mr. President of Bourse de Casablanca, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen. As you can see, our two-day conference entitled Morocco Capital Market Days in Dubai is drawing to a close. So is Dubai Expo finishing today, a worldwide event bringing together people and nationalities from all across the globe, meeting and sharing experiences. Dubai, from the dawn of time, has always been a meeting place, a trading hub, and it was the privilege of our delegation to come and spend part of a week in Dubai and also in Abu Dhabi doing precisely that. Meeting, sharing information, rekindling old relationships, and making new ones. Morocco and the Middle East have very deep ties, secular ties, cultural, social, but also multifaceted, very strong on the business side. Investors from this region have always looked upon favorably upon the Moroccan economy. A simple statistic to highlight that, 14% of the market cap of Bourse de Casablanca is actually held by Middle Eastern investors. And as we are embarking on a new journey, a journey of economic recovery, a journey of a new era post-COVID, we wanted to make sure that our partners in this region are fully aware of what we are trying to do. We realize that this is only the first step, and we are fully committed to foster this collaboration and make sure that together we are sharing the benefits, and most importantly, we are sharing the profits of this long-term relationship. Ending on a very positive note, I can report that we have had fantastic feedback from the investors we've seen. People, and I think our panelists have highlighted that, but investors from this region have said, look, you don't need to come to tell us invest in Morocco. We are convinced it's rather the opposite. We like investing in your Eurobond and your government bonds, but we are ready to take more risk. We are ready to finance even more optimistically your economy. So it is a very positive message that we are taking back to Casablanca and most importantly to Rabat to say that the appetite is here to tell our issuers that they should tap into this market where there is a lot of liquidity and a lot of appetite for the Moroccan economy. So on this positive note, I would like to end by thanking very warmly and sincerely Her Excellency Nadia Fattah Alaoui for her support for this very important initiative. Also, we have had great positive feedback on our delegation. I think our panelists talked about the expertise and the fantastic insights. We have had many investors who have congratulated us, and so I would like to pass on our sincere thanks and gratitude to all the professionals from capital markets who have accompanied us on this journey. I know that this is a period which is very busy in their calendar, and they have taken from that time to come with us on this mission. So on behalf of all the investors, thank you very much for your contribution to this mission. Lastly, but importantly, I would like to sincerely thank our partner, the Moroccan Capital Market Authority, for their support. And a special thanks to Mrs. Nzahayat, whose commitment and drive has made this mission possible. Probably wouldn't be here without it. And on that note, I bid you farewell. I wish you a blessed and prosperous Ramadan, and thank you for having us. Shukran.